Okay, today I wanted to talk about something that really frustrates me, and that's that NRG Esport and FCSchalke got relegated in the most previous summer split from the North American LCS and the EU LCS. And so the content of this conversation is going to be just about how it is that a professional sports team, or in the case of NRG Esport, two owners of a professional sport team, could get relegated from the NA and EU LCS, and why that should never ever happen. And so in order to explain that, I'm going to have to talk a little bit about how it is that I was able to dominate the North American LCS with TSM this last summer split, and exactly how the fundamental mechanisms there work and why they should have been in place in those two clubs as well. Of course, the first thing that you have to look at when you go into a new season is the talent acquisition. And for those moments, definitely NRG and FCSchalke should have, and probably did, rely a lot on the esport talent that they recruited. So the teams that they recruited and the connections in the scene, and they came in very light-handed. They said, okay, we want to learn, like, tell us what is best. We want to know what's good and what's not. And they came in with very open minds, and they left a lot of power with the people who they acquired and who they purchased in the brand. And that's really important, because talent acquisition is a very difficult thing when you don't have a lot of statistics to back it up. And so you need people who've been doing it for a couple seasons. When you do that, you can build a team with a starting point, okay? So let's say that maybe NRG Esport is here, TSM is here, maybe Immortals is here, maybe C9 is here in terms of the axis of strength, and maybe EchoFox is in the middle, and you have a starting point for the skill of your roster. Now, that matters. But the real differentiator between who makes it to Worlds, who makes it to playoffs, who does well at the end of the season, is the trajectory, the growth rate. So it doesn't matter if you have a little bit of a backward start, if you can get a higher trajectory, a higher slope than your opponents. So yes, you want to be as high as possible when you start. You also need to get the trajectory fast and high as well. And so you look at something like this. Maybe TSM's here, maybe Immortals is here. Maybe C9 is here, maybe, EchoFox was this, and then up, and the NRG, okay. So the next thing that I want to talk about is the sport management practices that give this trajectory growth, because it really comes down to that. Growth and constant growth is really hard to pull off in a vacuum. Yes, players can go through cycles where they're growing, and then they're not growing, and then they're growing, and they're not growing. That's a very natural way of progressing skills. You have high motivation and low motivation, et cetera, et cetera. And it's the job of sport managers, sport management coaches, to create an environment where there's constant growth. It's kind of like being a CEO, where you have a company and you always need to be growing. Even through expansion and retraction cycles, you always want to have growth. And that's the job of a coach, is to design an environment, a high-performance environment, where that trajectory is constant and upward. Okay, so first of all, don't worry, TSM fans. I'm not going to give away any secrets that are going to revolutionize the world. I am going to talk a lot about the environment that I created, but the secret sauce that causes the execution of that to be different from other teams, the reason that Immortals had pretty good management within the house, or within the structure, and they had an excellent structure, but they weren't able to keep up with their trajectory, because the secret sauce is me and Parth and the other coaches on our staff. And of course the players are the absolute core of that, but let's assume that player talent acquisition is going to be, you're going to do the best that you can, and there's going to be richer teams that get more stuff and poorer teams that get less stuff, and you really have to work with what you have. But the trajectory growth is going to come from the management part, which is completely on the coach, the strategic coach, Parth, and the other coaching staff. Okay, so let's dig into that. I and TSM managed to smash the North American LCS, including all records for winning in terms of winning streaks and time in game, et cetera, with basic management techniques. And I don't mean that we won, at the beginning because of those techniques. I'm saying that at the start, our game against Immortals was pretty rocky. And by the end of the split, it wasn't even close. I mean, we could walk on stage and be half asleep against some of the opponents, and the game would still end in 25 minutes, because the trajectory of the growth, it was unfortunate how incremental it was in some of the other teams. And especially NRG Esport and FCSchalke, because there was no excuse there for that. Okay, so here are the the 3 simple basic management techniques that I used to essentially keep TSM's growth completely upwards. And I cannot believe that NRG and FC Schalke and all of these other sports teams that are buying esports clubs are not doing this, because in my opinion, the amount of sport management knowledge and experience and the ability to construct a high performance environment in the little pinky finger of a 35-year-old assistant coach or front office coach in one of these sports clubs trumps most of the management that you will see in LCS teams. And I mean because of the tactics that they employ, because of the knowledge that they have about how to simply run meetings that are effective and what to focus on and how to create growth opportunities out of failure, essentially. So let me explain what I mean a little bit more in particular. The first thing is morning meetings. I stole this really straight from software engineering. You have daily stand-ups, where it became very clear that it was really good to have a daily stand-up in the morning to focus everybody on the one thing, the essential thing that we need to train or that we need to do, and to make sure that it was very productive. We had morning meetings just like Immortals and Cloud9 did, and over those meetings, we identified the day's themes, and I crafted a narrative of growth over the things that we had accomplished into the things that we actually needed to accomplish. And that's really important. It's really important to put into a powerful context, the education that needs to happen in today's training. And so that's just a really simple step. And now, of course, the secret sauce of that is how good are you at crafting narratives? I happen to have 6 years of experience in that and was very good at crafting narratives. And a lot of times you might have seen those narratives leaking out in TSM Legends and things in the end of the season. Like, we had this narrative about Immortals and C9, conspiring against this, that we used to power through a lot of training techniques in the playoffs. And those are very intentional things that a good manager and that somebody who NRG and Schalke should have essentially conscripted from their sports divisions to come down and do that would have worked. And I noticed that halfway through the season, Echo Fox went from kind of a headless chicken to a team driven by narrative. And it was about the same time that Rick Fox really took a handle, like going into the environment and making sure that he could construct that in a productive way. And you can see what happens when somebody who knows what they're doing takes charge of that and really puts their experience and their knowledge to good use. Okay, by the way, all the way down to the management level, I think that is where these sports clubs that are coming into esport can contribute right now. At the coach level and below, I think it's a really good idea that they're tiptoeing nicely and they're saying, okay, we want to learn the space, and we don't want to offend people, and we want to do esport with esport by esport, and they are trying to recruit coaches from within the scene and do it smartly and making sure that they listen to people on talent recruitment. But I think above the coach, in the management section and up, it's insane to trust somebody whose chops are unproven when you have people who are capable of designing those kind of environments and will secure the success of your team right there. And instead, you get relegated. Okay, so then the second thing was, well, okay, you have a game, you apply game theory to it, you realize that the essential learning points of this game happen within it, and then the only time to essentially craft a narrative or create a coaching moment is in the 20 minutes between a scrim. So those must be essential. And sure enough, the 20 minutes between a scrim, every single scrim, 6 times a day, added up, every single day, 6 days a week, all the way from the very first week for 12 weeks in a row, those 20-minute segments are the most essential, important elements for crafting growth. You have to nail every single one. Every single moment that you waste in those 20 minutes, and every single 20-minute thing you throw out the window because of, I don't know, I want to go smoke, and I have to use the bathroom, and it's not organized, and I'm pissed about this game, so I'm just going to huff and sit in the corner, blah, 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 is a slowing trajectory. Added together cumulatively, it's just a decay of the ability and the potential that you have to become coordinated and become a maximum unit on the patch that you're on. So it's really essential to structure those. And Parth and I essentially dove into the game theory and created a way that we felt was most essentially perfect for using those 20 minutes. And then I divided them up among 3 different tasks, and we did what is really called in the corporate world 360-degree feedback. It's quite simple. You have feedback from above, feedback from the side, from peers, feedback from below. It's 360 degrees all around. And feedback from the self also. So it's universal feedback. So we had feedback, we had a time for feedback from the coaches, we had a time for feedback from teammates that was kind of started. It wasn't every 20-minute section, but it was designed as an art. This is where the science and the art mix, where you have to have an experienced coach who can really feel, using the 80-20 rule, like this is the 20% thing we need to focus on that gives 80% of the results at every single moment, and can play with those 20 minutes to make sure that you're doing the right thing. But all in all, throughout a whole day's work and a whole week's work, you've got to have all of those elements of feedback. So we had sections for reflective feedback where they had to pour over their learning phase. We had sections for coach feedback. We had sections for teammate feedback when we would all look at something somebody was doing and contribute, ideas. And you might have seen on TSM Legends a lot of those circle things after the LCS. That was a full-fledged, we have lots of time version of that 360-degree feedback where we're starting with, self-criticism. And we're moving on to getting the team engineered around an idea of like what were our core mistakes and whose fault is it? Essentially, what is the number one error that we need to address in that game, etc. So we didn't really hit feedback from below. We could have gotten a lot of feedback from Reddit, I'm sure, but we avoided that like the plague. Although I'm sure most of the players did go into Reddit and take lots of feedback, and so I just let that kind of take the place of all the feedback from below that we would get. Okay, so the third basic management technique that I deployed was rotating responsibility. It's really difficult to ensure that people are going to be stage ready and to ensure that, for example, Biofrost isn't going to choke on stage if he's not put in a position of immense responsibility. And that kind of accountability for actions also can overwhelm somebody. It can weigh on them like a weight, and day after day after day can be an imposing force. So something that in the corporate world and in management, you rotate around between people, you hold people accountable for something, they feel the tinge for it, and then you lay off and you let them do the learning and the things necessary for that growth, and then you bring it back around again. And there's a really interesting psychological study, actually, I just remembered, I wasn't going to talk about this, but it has to do with feedback, and they were testing whether regular feedback or randomized feedback on an error was more effective. What they discovered was that randomized feedback was more effective because you never know when you're going to get judged. When you know when you're going to get judged and the feedback is regular, your brain turns on for those points and turns off for the other points. So you don't really learn during the other points. You can't fool the brain. You can try to focus during those, but subconsciously you will be less focused. Now when it's randomized and you don't know when it's going to happen, like that pinprick is there. So you got to make sure that everybody is sharp. Every week you're hitting at them in a certain way with feedback that kind of creates the atmosphere of accountability and responsibility for your own actions and for your own faults and for your own growth as well, because you have to highlight that. And I've seen in my tour of teams and in seeing tons and tons of different management all around the scene, I have seen little to zero, actually zero evidence of this outside of Devin from CLG and Reggie from TSM. Outside of those two people, I have seen almost nothing of this inside of a team environment in any way. Now, I don't think it's a surprise. Those two teams are pretty squared away. I forgot to call out Cloud9, of course. Jack stepped into Cloud9 in a huge way this year, and he brought with him, maybe Reggie inspired him to do this, by stepping in over and over again throughout the years to kind of make sure that his squad makes it all the way to Worlds, and because I saw him in a huge way just descending on his team and creating these kinds of basic precepts and recruiting a coach that would actually execute on them in the way necessary to cause that growth. And that was really, really fun to see. The Wild Stallions of C9 kind of come under the idea that this structured approach to perfection, day after day after day after day, can lead to constant growth. By the way, some of the TSM fanboys and myself are probably at this point on tears, thinking oh, you had all this stuff and it was going so good and you were dominating so hard, so then why did you lose? That's the topic of another video, which I will certainly make in the future. So keep an eye out for that. Make sure you subscribe to my channel if you want to see a little ping notification on your phone when it pops up for you. So I will talk about that, and there are excellent reasons as to why that failure took place. Not the least of which is just that at the global level, when you get to those 16 teams, everybody has this kind of environment already. Then you get to see skill rise to the top. Okay, I think that it is insane, in my mind, that these teams are spending that these sports teams, as FC Schalke and NRG Esport, the owners of the Sacramento Kings, are spending millions of dollars in the scene, and they're coming in, and I think they're doing a very good job, like on the player level and the coach level, being very respectful and trying to learn esport. But I think it's so irresponsible to look at a team environment, and they've been around team environments and high performance environments their whole lives, and they look at a team environment and they see all of the flaws that are inherent in there, and they understand these really basic management techniques that would just make any team work better, much less, an esport team. And then they do nothing. They don't, get rid of the person who doesn't necessarily know what they're doing. And I'm sorry for all the esport managers, but honestly, when you're 22 years old and that's all the experience you've had in the world, and you've never done any pedagogical training or any management training, and you've just never had decades of experience managing these environments, then maybe you don't have the skill set, and that's just the case. It's not on your shoulders that your teams are dropping the ball and not being able to maintain constant growth, but it is on the shoulders of these owners to understand that this is where they should have intervened. And I'm so proud of Rick Fox for taking that step and going in and being like, I'm going to spend my time, I'm going to downgrade my career and upgrade the importance of what's happening here, and creating that narrative so that he could be successful and come into this next season, with a club still in the pro league. And if you just taken those people and done that, like you could have. That's what leads to things like this and not being in the Challenger Series. Hey guys, thanks for tuning in, and I wanted to encourage you to subscribe so you get a notification when I make a new video. Also, if you want to ask a question for the show, please check out the instructions you can ask on Twitter, or there's a link down below for longer questions. Feel free to jump down to the comments. You'll notice that I reply to a lot of them. I really appreciate it when you weigh in on the show and on the content. Let me know what you think.